Thank you. Robin, I am going to, without any further discussion, without any further input from me, go straight to you and ask you to address us. I think by agreement, we have about 30 minutes for that. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. And I want to say thank you so much to Peace John for the introduction and to Lois for the opportunity to be part of this webinar this morning. It is an incredibly important topic. It's a very moving and a very difficult topic to talk about. And I have it as my privilege to be able to give you an introduction to it. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Whitney Rosenberg, who is going to give you some of the hopeful messaging, I think, around it. But I'd like to just ask you to hold tight while I speak. Some of the things that I'm going to be speaking about are quite difficult to hear and very challenging. But I hope that will raise some awareness. I'm going to share my screen, and while I do, I'm not sure that there's any necessity for me to give much more information than Peter John very kindly said about me, but just to let you know that I style myself as a child protection activist and a writer. I run an organization called For the Voiceless, which is a nonprofit, and I'm a regular contributor to the Daily Maverick. I was fortunate enough last year to be the runner-up in the Isiulihle competition for journalism around children, and also to win the Mandy Rousseau Award for government accountability for children, which actually I have to say was really probably a highlight of my life, because I do feel like the opportunity to be able to tell children's stories is the thing that I'm most passionate about. So for those of you who don't know For the Voiceless, effectively what we're about is about telling children's stories and lobbying government to look for changes in policy around them. And one of the key areas that we focus on is around abandonment and illegal abortion, which is what I'm going to be speaking about this morning. So I'm going to hope that, there we go, my screen is now working. If you can't see it, please will you let me know? I can see it on my side. Yeah, just please shout if there's a problem. So first of all, what I'd like to do this morning is I'd like to spend a little bit of time quantifying the crisis that we have in terms of late-term abortion and abandonment. I'm then going to go on to spend a bit of time talking about what that looks like in South Africa, what some of the causes are, and also just delve quickly into some of the solutions as a way of, as a segue into what Whitney's going to be speaking about a bit later. So first of all, just to say that when we talk about quantifying late-term abortion and abandonment, the truth of this is that we actually do not know how big the problem is. We have done some research on it over many years, and we finally have some government input around it, but it is key to say that this has not been an area where there has been funded government-based research. And so there's a lot of guesswork going into how big the crisis is. What we do know is that Dr. Dee Blackie did some research on abandonment for her master's thesis, which was published in 2013. And what she found was that in 2010, 3,500 children survived abandonment in that year. So that is a staggering amount. We're probably talking about 10 a day if we look at that number. We didn't get any verification about those numbers from government or any argument, to be honest, about it. And then along with the National Adoption Coalition of South Africa, Dee Blackie did some research in 2016, which then found similar numbers. So that study found about 3,000 babies a year surviving abandonment. And I think it's very important that we classify these two areas separately. For a long time, that figure was quoted as children who were abandoned, but that isn't the truth. It's the children who survive abandonment. The ones who don't is probably a far bigger number, and we're going to get to that in a moment. So finally, this year, after many, many years of asking the Department of Social Development to give us some statistics around child abandonment, they reported to the Parliamentary Committee for Social Development, the Portfolio Committee, and noted that there were probably about 10,500 abandonments that had taken place over a 10-year period. Now, that is, it's a questionable statistic. In a way, we're very grateful for it because it's the first time the government has committed to a number and given us confirmation of what we already know, which is that this is a crisis in the country. Unfortunately, however, these figures are incomplete, and we know they're incomplete because instead of consulting Part A of the Child Protection Register, which should have very detailed statistics about our children in need of care and protection, what the government did is they devolved the responsibility for getting these figures down to provincial level, who in turn asked the child protection organizations in those provinces to provide figures. So what happened is some of the provinces sent back quite comprehensive figures. Others, for example, like Northwest, sent back no figures at all. And others were certainly questionable. One of the ones which is least plausible was the one that came from KwaZulu-Natal. For those of you who are in that province, you would know that there's a huge abandonment crisis in KwaZulu-Natal. And I think they committed to about 282 children over a 10-year period abandoned, which we know is incomplete. And in fact, interestingly enough, they responded to a question from a journalist to say that about that number had been abandoned in the province over a 2-year period. So what it looks like is perhaps they do not have complete statistics over a 10-year period. But even so, with that number, we're talking about 1,000 children surviving abandonment every year, which is a very significant number of children. So now to look at the even more difficult part. If we know that that is the number of children that are surviving abandonment, how many children are not surviving abandonment? Again, I'm afraid the answer is we actually don't know. Some studies that were done in Gauteng around about 2015 showed that over a 3-year period, there were 1,800 unnatural stillbirths that came through forensic pathology labs. Now, it's very complicated. We do not have a classification in either our criminal statistics or our forensic statistics for abandoned children. But for reasons that I'm going to explain a little bit later, we can identify stillbirths as being children that were abandoned, because otherwise they wouldn't have ended up classified as unnatural deaths. So 1,800 over a 3-year period, roughly about 600 a year. That is one province on its own. And that is a large number of children. From that, we can deduce probably that in Gauteng in 2015, for every child that survived abandonment, 2 died. So we need to be probably in all of our figures around abandonment, doubling the numbers that we are made familiar with, or even tripling them. Maybe Save Us South Africa, which is the organization that Whitney belongs to, have been tracking abandonments over the lockdown period. And this is just from media reports alone. They have 252 media stories about abandonment since lockdown, of which, unfortunately, 151 were found dead. So again, that's about a 60% ratio of children being found dead to 40 being found alive. And we know that's only the tip of the iceberg. It's really one of the tragedies of South Africa is that we're so desensitized to issues around abandonment that instead of it making headline news, it's often a footnote in many media articles. And so for every one of those media stories, there are potentially hundreds that we actually were not made familiar with. Probably the most accurate, and for me, the most confronting statistic of all of the statistics that I can put together around child abandonment. What I can say is that from this, and this was a very comprehensive study done by the Medical Research Council, which was published in 2016, they indicated that a child born in South Africa is at the highest risk of being killed during its first 6 days of life. And that is as a result of abandonment and late-term abortion, which is what I'm going to be speaking about in a moment. Again, when it comes to late-term abortion, we actually don't know how big the problem is. It's really interesting that Mari Stopes were the people who gave us the statistic around late-term illegal abortions. They are of the opinion, and again, this is a fairly elderly statistic. It's probably also from around about 2015. They estimated that there are about 250,000 abortions that take place annually in South Africa, of which they believe about 53 to 58% are illegal. So that works out to roughly 150,000 abortions. We also know from the Department of Health statistics that approximately 5,000 mothers lose their lives every 2 years to illegal abortion. And let's bear in mind that those are only mothers that we know about, the ones that have gone through Department of Health hospitals following an illegal abortion. There are probably far, far more than we know about. And because Mari Stopes actually could not really put together accurate statistics, we could probably say that there might be even more illegal late-term abortions than that. I just want to draw your attention to this. And I think part of the problem with statistics is that sometimes we depersonalize the stories behind it. But I would like you to remember every time that we speak about these statistics, that behind each one of them is an innocent little life. So what does abandonment look like in South Africa? At a high level, the best way of describing it is that abandonment is hidden and heartbreaking. And I wrote an article about this a few years back where that was my title. And I guess this is kind of sort of my headline when it comes to abandonment. We do not speak about it, but the stories behind it are devastating. And I thought that perhaps one of the best ways of illustrating this is to describe, and this is going to sound incredibly odd given this has mostly been an academic conversation up until this point, I'd like to describe a dream that one of the founding members of an organization called El Roy, which for those of you who are faith-based would know it means the God who sees. It's an organization that is a baby saver, and the founder of it had a very significant dream a number of years back, which is what prompted him to work in child protection and with abandoned babies. And I'd like to read it to you because I think it actually articulates incredibly well the problem in South Africa. This is, his name's Trevor. He said, in the dream, he and his wife were sitting at a coffee shop in Hillbrow when a crowd of people walked down the road towards them, carrying a large coffin. He went to help them carry the coffin because it looked like they were struggling with the task. As he drew closer to the coffin, the bearers dropped it and the lid of the coffin came off. The coffin was filled with the bodies of newborn babies. But as he looked closer, he saw a hand move and realized that not all the babies were dead. He pushed forward to retrieve the baby, only to find that there were others still alive. He called out to his wife and started to pass her the babies. However, the coffin bearers pushed him aside, replaced the lid, and continued with their journey. And I'm reading it because every time I read it, I find it such a shocking depiction of the situation in South Africa. You know, one of the things which I really struggle with most about abandonment is that many of those babies were actually healthy and well in the womb before they were abandoned, or they were subject to a late-term illegal abortion and then sometimes abandoned thereafter. They had every opportunity to grow up to be healthy, fully functioning individuals, but it was the act of abandonment that changed their lives forever. And it's something that we don't as a society engage with enough. So research, and again, this is compliments of Dr. Dee Blackie. Thankfully, she spent a lot of time looking at the characteristics of abandonment in South Africa. And we know from that 65% of abandoned children are newborns. So neonates, 90% of the children are under the age of 1. Now, interesting enough, since 2013, when Dee did her studies, what we've seen is an increase in the number of both anonymous abandonments and those of older children. And all abandonment stories are tragic. The stories of these older children are even more tragic. One of the ones which I wrote about during lockdown, which really had an impact on me, was that of a 2.5-year-old little boy who was placed in a dustbin outside of a hospital. And of course, at 2.5, we know he was able to understand what was going on, what was happening to him. Most recently, I was at a conference last week on missing and abandoned children. And during that conference, one of the social workers told a story of a 5-year-old little boy who was abandoned. So poignantly, his name is Happy. And that was the only bit of information that he knew about himself. And the tragedy for me is that he was a little boy who somebody loved enough to call Happy. And yet at 5, he was abandoned. So what we're seeing in those stories is many parents saying that they weren't coping from the start. And from the start, they wanted to put their children into child protection, but they were not allowed to. And so they're often giving up when their children are older. And again, some of the factors that we'll be looking at in a moment related to why we have such a big abandonment problem will also be factors which are becoming even more significant now since the COVID pandemic. Dee Blackie also found that 70% of abandonments are unsafe. So from all of those media stories, we will know that we find these little babies in toilets, drains, rubbish dumps, landfills, open parks, open felts. Some of them we'll never find, though. Those are the ones that were buried alive, the ones that are flushed down drains, the ones that are eaten by animals or rodents. Those babies are very seldom accounted for. But the fact that 70% of our abandonments are unsafe should give us huge pause, because that tells us that many moms are so desperate that they can't even make a safe relinquishment plan for their children. In addition to this, what we know is that many of these babies were first aborted before they were abandoned. And a really significant study that was conducted by Luke Lamprecht and Sherry Errington in Johannesburg showed that more than half of abandoned fetuses that were found were post 24 weeks when the baby would have been viable. So those babies, certainly if they had not been aborted, would likely have been born alive. And these were little bodies that were found. A very difficult to process bit of information that came from Dr. Janet Lam, she works at the Tsunami Foundation. And for those of you who work in child protection, you'll know that if a child has come through either been abandoned or been placed into child protection in Johannesburg, most of them have been at some point seen by Dr. Lam. And she said this: of the abandoned babies she sees, half were abandoned unsafely, and about 60% were born prematurely. Some of them she's seen are as small as 1 kilogram. These babies often experience developmental delays, and some are physically scarred, especially from rat bites and burns. And that's based on her personal experience. So what do these illegal abortion providers look like? Most of you, I think none of us can live in South Africa without being confronted daily by the signs on the lampposts. But, we have these perceptions of illegal abortion providers with the bloodied aprons and the knives. But in fact, these are hardened criminals. They are people who are providing scheduled drugs that they should not be, they're not permitted to distribute, or in rural areas, often making women drink chemicals. And tragically, what they're telling those women is that the baby will dissolve or will be flushed away. And so for many of these women, when they give birth to a very premature but wholly perfect infant, some of them are so shocked and devastated. And some of those babies don't survive the late-term abortion process. But we have even stories of ones who have survived that have been killed by their desperate mothers thereafter because they were so shocked by the fact that the baby was born alive. some of the causes of abandonment and illegal abortion. I think we can probably safely say that most child protection issues in South Africa come down to poverty, inequality, and unemployment. We just have such desperate and devastating levels of poverty in this country. And one of the things which continues to be shocking in South Africa is the fact that some women are too poor to parent. And we see that often. I think the misperception about abandonment is that it's often just young mothers and it's a first-time pregnancy, but actually we're seeing more and more women who are abandoning their second, third, fourth child because they're simply not in a place to be able to care for them financially. And we know this is a huge and tragic problem in South Africa. We have such huge levels of gender-based violence. Many of these babies are conceived through rape or incest, and the moms feel that they can never actually bond with those babies, and they choose to abandon as a result of that. Abandoning fathers is a common theme in almost all of the stories we hear around abandonment, where the mother feels that she was first abandoned by the father, and she's not in a place to be able to take care of her baby on her own. And as a result, she feels desperate, and that sometimes leads her to abandon. What we also know, and for those of you who were able to attend the excellent seminar on teen pregnancies that was also hosted on this forum a while back, you'll know that teen pregnancies are a massive problem in this country, and they are unfortunately an increasing problem as well. The numbers are staggering, and one of the ones which I was most struck by was the fact that if we look at teen pregnancies, including deliveries and legal abortions, they rose to 152,000 over the 2020-2021 year. So the question is, what is happening to all of those babies? Those are only the numbers that we know of babies that have been born in institutions, the Department of Health, and we wonder what is happening to the children who are not being born in hospitals, and even some of the ones that are being born in hospitals. So teen pregnancies is a massive issue. Then also we know that it's very difficult for moms to get crisis pregnancy counseling in South Africa, and often they are only presented with one option, which is you need to parent. And for many of them who feel that they cannot parent, that is not an option. So that is something which is a huge contributing factor. And this is one of the areas which I want to highlight because I believe it's an area where we could look at law reform, but we need to be very clear about the fact that our legal parameters are actually often what is promoting abandonment and late-term abortion. One of the issues, and I'm not sure we're going to have enough time to be able to go into this in great detail, but it's what we call the born alive principle in South African law, which says that no baby is actually technically alive until it has been born and taken a breath. So if you were to kill a baby even up to 40 weeks in the womb, it would not be considered murder. But if that baby was born and took a breath and you killed it then, it would be considered murder. So many countries across the world don't have, they have this law, they don't have a born alive exception. And it's largely because of our abortion laws, but many of them do have a feticide law, which says that either at any point during a pregnancy, if a child is killed, that is considered to be murder and a crime, or alternatively, what you'll see in countries like the UK is if that child is after the age of viability, so 24 weeks, then if that baby is killed in the womb, that would be considered murder. But in South Africa, we don't have that. And we've got some very important precedent-setting cases. The one that we refer to a lot in law is State versus Mashimpa, which was a really tragic story where the father decided that he did not want his unborn baby. His partner was 38 weeks pregnant at the time. They'd already named their little girl Jenna May, and he organized for Mashimpa to shoot her through the womb. The baby passed away, and all of the forensic evidence said that she behaved as a child who had been born would have behaved. She had the same pain reaction, the same stress reaction to being shot, but because she had not been born yet, there were no criminal murder-related charges for Mishumpa. We also saw this more recently in the Sekhafatse story, where you would remember she was 8 months pregnant, where she was murdered, and her estranged partner was given life imprisonment for her death. But really tragically, when the family were interviewed, one of the things that they said was that they found it very difficult that he had not been sentenced at all for the murder of Sekhafatse Pule's little girl, who again had also been named, and she would have been 2 years old this year had she not died. So this is a very important issue. Also, we know that under 18s cannot place their children into the child protection system. So we look back at all those teen pregnancies and we say those teens were told that unless they got parental or guardianship approval, they could not place their child into the child protection system. And so if they chose not to parent or they chose not to tell their parents about that, what would have happened to those children? Again, we also know that foreigners, they risk deportation if they try and put their children into the child protection system. And we will not, as South Africa, place foreign children into South African families. So those children can't be placed into the child protection system either, even if they have South African parents. So even if they have a South African father, often that can't be proven. We also have no legal form of safe relinquishment, which is what Whitney is going to spend a bit more time on. I'm going to draw this to a close now because I've spoken for a long time. But what I did want to say is that there are a number of solutions that we should be looking at in terms of what we can do around abandonment and late-term abortion. And instead of doing these one by one, I've put them all out there so that you can spend a little bit of time just looking at them and digesting. I think the almost the impossible task is the first one, finding solutions to poverty, inequality, and gender-based violence. But that obviously is something that needs to be addressed in this country on an ongoing basis. And I'm grateful for the fact that there are inroads being made into addressing gender-based violence, but there's still so much that needs to be done. We need to educate fathers about their roles in raising children, and there are some potential reforms coming through the Children's Amendment Bill around the rights of unmarried fathers, which might make it easier for those fathers to be involved in the lives of their children. We need to look at promoting crisis pregnancy counselling. I feel very strongly that we need to be providing support to pregnant mothers and mothers with newborns. And one of the things which is being proposed there is that potentially we could extend the child support grant to mothers who are in their 3rd trimester of pregnancy and look at using that as a way of helping cushion the blow of poverty for brand new moms. We also need to make it easier for moms to place their children into the child protection system. One of the shocking figures which Baby Savers South Africa mentioned to me is that they get 15 to 25 inquiries from pregnant moms every single day asking for assistance because they cannot raise their children. And again, that is an absolutely staggering amount of moms who are in desperate crisis. We also, and this is my personal proposal, we need to have a feticide law in South Africa. At the moment, we cannot police illegal late-term abortion providers. And also what we've seen is that because of the Born Alive law, and it's one of the reasons why I mentioned it, is that often the police will make the assumption that a child was born dead, was stillborn. It's why I mentioned earlier, we have that as being the category in our forensic pathology labs for these children. And so as a result, they do not police. So we need feticide laws, which will allow us to get involved in policing of illegal late-term abortion providers and not be in a situation anymore where you actually have to make a complaint before the police will go and investigate these providers, and where there are authorities taking responsibility for this criminal activity. We need to allow pregnant teens and foreigners to place their children into the child protection system. And lastly, and here I'm going to hand over to Whitney, we need to develop and implement safe relinquishment and safe haven laws. So if you would like any more information, I've gone very quickly over some of these topics. You can find it on my website under the topic abandonment, or you're welcome to get in touch with me. And I want to say thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to talk about it this morning.
Thank you, Robin. As always the case when you present, there's so much information and such a and so many nuanced positions that I think we could continue to do advocacy around. So thank you very much. I'm going to move straight into to Whitney's presentation now, because from what we heard earlier, they complement each other. And so Whitney, thank you. It's over to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to present this morning and for the platform to really bring to light these very important issues. As Robin has highlighted, a very shocking situation in South Africa and really around the world. This is not only in South Africa where we are experiencing this crisis, but also in many other parts of the world. I am Dr. Whitney Rosenberg. I am also co-founder of Baby Savers South Africa. I did my research on the legal regulation of infant abandonment in South Africa, and it came about because I visited a home in 2015, and a children's home, and I was introduced to a little baby boy that was abandoned in a pit latrine, and he had suffered many disabilities because of that. I then visited another home, which was the Door of Hope Children's Mission, where I found a different story. I found that they had a baby saver and a little girl that was abandoned in their saver or relinquished safely in their saver. She flourished after being adopted by an American couple and is actually identified as being academically gifted. So these two stories really motivated me to bring change and to research this. Why do we not have a solution when a solution is out there? So I embarked on researching various countries and their laws and exactly what their laws entail. And I thought, let me do my thesis on this and bring a solution to South Africa so that we may also implement something that will save the lives of children. So today I'm going to be taking you through what baby savers are, what baby safe haven laws are, also how these function, the different rights that support these laws, and how we can implement these laws in South Africa. So my focus is solely on the legal side of things. And yeah, I hope that I've kept it brief. So baby savers, a baby saver is a baby box or baby safe in a wall of a charitable institution, or it can be an independent saver where it's not in the wall of a charitable institution. So one of the examples is a saver that's in the wall of a charitable institution would be like the Door of Hope Children's Mission. A saver that's independent, an example of this would be the Helderberg baby saver. Once a baby is placed inside the safe, an alarm is triggered and first responders are alerted, and they then retrieve the baby immediately from the safe. The baby is checked for any medical conditions, and the baby is taken in a CYCC or another place of safety. Many countries around the world have baby savers, and these countries are India, China, also various first world countries like Germany, Switzerland, France have a method of safe relinquishment, the USA, so various countries around the world, South Korea, and the list goes on. In South Africa, we have 40 baby savers that are operational at the moment. These are operating illegally. They are not operating under any legal backing. And the Baby Saver South Africa, we have 40 members who have signed up or who are part of Baby Saver South Africa that we assist. Baby safe havens. So baby safe havens are different to baby savers, and very often these two are used interchangeably, but they are very, very different. A baby safe haven is when a baby is personally handed over to a police station, fire station, or to a hospital, personal handover to any member of staff at those three facilities. Baby safe haven laws are in the US specifically, and Namibia in 2019 implemented these laws, which entail the personal handover of an infant. Very different to a baby saver, where a mother may anonymously and safely relinquish an infant into a baby box in a structure in a wall, and she may anonymously leave the baby there and the baby will be attended to. My research entitled The Legal Regulation of Infant Abandonment in South Africa caused me to have a look at 3 countries, Germany, the US, and Namibia. I chose Europe, the US, as well as an African country, to give a holistic view of what is happening in the world and what the various approaches are in the world. In Germany, baby savers are referred to as baby klappen, also baby box. Germany has implemented 3 systems. They started off with baby savers. They moved on to anonymous birth, which is a way for a mother to anonymously in a hospital give birth, leave the child there after giving birth. The purpose of anonymous birth in Germany was to ensure the safety of a mother, because they knew that many women were having their infants in their homes in unsafe conditions, and this was leading to health problems, health complications, and even death. So they said they would implement anonymous birth to facilitate women so that they may come in, have the baby safely, and be able to leave knowing that the baby is taken care of, as well as the mother being taken care of. They then went on to develop what is referred to as confidential birth. Now, confidential birth went one step further. It allowed the mother the opportunity to leave information, identifying information and non-identifying information of the child, so that when the child reaches a certain age, which is usually 16, the child may approach the authorities to find out about where their origins are. So that helped for the right to knowledge of origins. Mothers may still choose to give anonymous birth should they not wish to leave any identifying information. Also, leaving this information does not mean that the mother is obligated when the child reaches the age of 16 to make that information available. When the child reaches the age of 16, the child has to ask for permission to access that information. The mother is then approached and she is requested for whether that information may be made available, and she can still deny the child access to that information at the age of 16. When I wrote my thesis, I wrote extensively on confidential birth. I also contacted one of the German authors that wrote a very good article on confidential birth. And once making contact with her subsequent to her article, she said she actually goes back on her initial finding that confidential birth is good. And she said this because women wish to remain anonymous. And what confidential birth does is that it places a heavy burden on these women throughout their lives, that one day the child may find me. And this was found to be, which is what this author said to me afterwards, was found to be a deterrent rather than a encouragement to women who are desperate to make use of confidential birth. So she said her initial findings is not correct. She thinks that she made the wrong finding and that confidential birth is not, in fact, the answer. I highlight confidential birth because I feel if we do have issues with the right to knowledge of origins, which we do know is an issue in South Africa, which has been brought up in respect of abandonment, then we have an option, which is that mothers may leave identifying information of these children. It leaves our options open, and that's why I rather present it than as opposed to not presenting this option. The United States, they have a very interesting history when it comes to baby safe haven laws. They implemented baby safe haven laws in 1999, actually after South Africa implemented baby savers or baby safes. The Door of Hope Children's Mission was the first modern day baby saver. And it's actually very interesting to note that the first modern day baby saver was in South Africa. However, every other country then followed suit, but they have gone further to legalize baby savers. Despite us being the first country to have the modern day baby saver, we still do not have any legal backing of these savers. So the United States started with baby safe haven laws, which is the personal handover of infants to police stations, fire stations, as well as hospitals. During my research, I found an issue with this. And my issue was that these states are often consist of small towns, and these women, most of these women would travel outside of their state to hand over their child, to do the personal handover of their child in another state. And the reason they were doing this is so that they could remain anonymous. Because if you hand over your child in your own state, more often than not, someone will identify you, will know about you. You would be exposed, is what these women felt. And that's why they would travel outside of their state to a neighboring state or another state that allows the personal relinquishment of infants. Interestingly enough, the United States is moving away from baby safe haven laws. They still have baby safe haven laws, but they are moving towards, more and more states are moving towards implementing baby savers. And initially in my research, I found that issue with baby safe haven laws, that it does not guarantee anonymity. And my proposal, as you'll see later on, is for us to implement baby savers first in South Africa and then move on to implementing baby safe haven laws. And the United States has now sort of admitted that their move towards implementing baby safe haven laws was perhaps a step in the wrong direction because it does not guarantee the mother anonymity. And now the various states are starting with bringing in baby savers. And then lastly, Namibia. In 2019, Namibia implemented, in a shocking move, implemented baby safe haven laws. I say shocking because prior to 2019, Namibia's child protection laws and Children's Act mimicked that of South Africa. All of their laws with regard to children mimic the approach that's followed in South Africa. In fact, we can see when they promulgated their laws, they did that after South Africa promulgated their Children's Act. And their Children's Act is very similar, if not the same, to the South African Children's Act. So they were following us all along in this, in the development of these laws. And then they go and do a very big move and a very a very good move in implementing baby safe haven laws because of the need that they saw in their country. And another interesting point about Namibia is that they only had a record of 13 fetuses being abandoned monthly. And they saw this as a significant problem. And that's why they moved to promulgate this Section 227, subsection 1 of the Child Care and Protection Act. And this specific section says a parent, guardian, or caregiver of a child who abandons the child may not be prosecuted under Section 254 for such abandonment if the child, A, is left within the physical control of a person at the premises of a hospital, police station, fire station, school, place of safety, children's home, or any other prescribed place, and B, shows no signs of abuse, neglect, or malnutrition. So this was promulgated only after 13 fetuses were found abandoned. That is in a huge difference to what South Africa is experiencing. We are way above 13. The statistics that Robin has highlighted indicate the huge significant problem that we have, yet we have not implemented a law like Namibia has. So I do write a piece on Namibia. They do have many issues with their law, because as you see the section here, this is their law on baby safe havens. This is the full extent of it. They haven't specified important issues like the age of a child in safe relinquishment. What's the maximum age of a child? And what should happen in various instances should someone wish to reclaim that child? So I've written an article on that in the African Human Rights Journal for those of you who want further information on that. However, at the end of my article, I actually come to the conclusion that despite it having shortcomings, they made a move in the right direction for the protection of the unborn child, or for the protection of the child yet to be born, so that a mother has an option to personally hand that child over. So the question is, are baby safes legal in South Africa? And the short answer is no, they are not legal in South Africa, because Section 305 of our Children's Act states that abandonment of a child warrants a fine or 10 years imprisonment. It is a criminal offense in any form. Abandonment in any form is a criminal offense in our country. And therefore, a mechanism used to abandon a child or aiding the abandonment of a child, such as a baby saver, is also seen as illegal. Then Section 113 of the General Law Amendment Act, which Robin touched on very briefly, provides for the crime of concealment of birth of a newly born child. Now, a charge of concealment of birth, as contained in this section, is applied if a mother hides the body of an infant. This does not include the act of exposure of an infant, because the elements of this crime involve concealing or disposing of the child's body, as opposed to abandoning the child's body in an open field, toilet, or alongside the road, as we see in news articles. So the problem with concealment of birth is that it does not actually provide a solution in this instance, because even if a child is found, that mother cannot be held for this crime of concealment of birth, depending on where the child is found. And we know from news reports that these children are being unsafely abandoned in the open veld, street, in dustbins and pit latrines. These are regarded as public spaces, and therefore a crime of concealment of birth can never succeed in these instances. Also, only one person has ever been convicted of a crime of concealment of birth. It's a very difficult offense to prove on the grounds that these elements of concealing and disposing of a child's body need to be present. Then the mother may also be charged with murder or attempted murder, and this seldom happens because finding the mother is the issue. So clearly, from what our laws depict, our laws neither serve as a deterrent, stopping women from doing this, and they are not retributive, because retributive would have meant that these women are prosecuted for this. But we see that this is also not the case. So what really then is the function of these laws if they are not serving as a deterrent or retributive? These laws only function once a crime is committed, once the infant is unsafely abandoned, and therefore they do not provide an adequate solution in preventing the act of abandonment and possibly the death of an infant. This restrictive legislation is one of the causes of child abandonment, because it does not provide the mother with a further option such as safe relinquishment. The proliferation of infant abandonment will continue if preventative measures are not adopted to curb this practice. Only punishing the action does not safeguard the lives of infants. Such laws would be justified if used in conjunction with an option for safe relinquishment. In that instance, if a mother still opts to unsafely abandon her child, her prosecution for these crimes is warranted. The goals of deterring crimes of this nature and of retribution through punishment are not attained because few women are ever successfully prosecuted. So clearly these laws are not functioning as they should. One of the leading causes of infant abandonment is restrictive legislation, as I've just pointed out, because it's legislation that does not give mothers another option. Now, we know that other options do exist, which is the option of abortion or adoption. But clearly we can see that abortion is not an option that is regarded as one that is morally acceptable in South Africa. A study done by Pew Research Center's 2013 Global Attitude Survey found that 61% of South Africans regard abortions as morally unacceptable. This statistic clearly shows us that the laws that are currently in place surrounding abortion, as advanced as they may seem, it's really not in use. It's not effective because 61% of South Africans regard abortions as morally unacceptable. Then adoptions. When it comes to adoption, which is the other option, there's lots of red tape. Consent is needed for someone who is a minor. That minor needs consent from her parents or guardian in order to give that child up for adoption. And this is seen as a roadblock for many desperate women who wish to, or women suffering from teen pregnancies, who wish to hand over or safely relinquish their children. The other issue with adoption is that the anonymity that these specific group of women that find themselves in this desperate situation, the anonymity that they seek is not available with adoption. Because in this instance, a woman needs to make herself available, very open process, and very often she is not able to hide her identity in these instances. So safe relinquishment through a baby saver, which is what I'm proposing. What does it provide that is going to bridge the gap between late-term abortions and unsafe abandonment to save the life of an infant? So the first thing is anonymity. This is where the link between late-term abortions or the solution for late-term abortions and unsafe abandonment is crucial. Anonymity is the driving force behind the use of baby savers and any safe relinquishment laws. In countries that have implemented safe relinquishment laws, they have found that, especially the one that I've mentioned, the US in the beginning, they have found that women seek anonymity. Without anonymity and confidentiality, women will not make use of this option. And what do we find in the case of late-term abortion? That there's a shame and desperation carried by these women, especially in the, we can see this especially with the fact that doctors who perform late-term abortions are not prosecuted except for illegally dispensing medicine if they are found. Because the women who this happens to do not come forward. They have a shame. They have a desperation. So they are too afraid to come forward, also coupled with the fact that they know that they too are committing a crime. And therefore, anonymity is one of those factors that really encourage a mother to rather make use of a safe option of relinquishment. The US is a good example, which I mentioned in the beginning, by them implementing baby savers after starting with safe haven laws. And they found that safe haven laws do not provide mothers with the anonymity that they seek, and that actually baby savers is even a better step, allowing women to keep their identities a secret. And then very importantly is that we should see a baby saver as a last resort, that pregnancy counseling needs to be our first option. Now, we very well know that in some areas, pregnancy counseling is unobtainable. And despite pregnancy counseling, some women may still choose to abandon their babies. And that shows for pregnancy counseling being unsuccessful. And where pregnancy counseling is unobtainable or unsuccessful, that's when a baby saver should be used. Now, what are the constitutional rights that support the implementation of baby savers? There are various rights in the Constitution that support the introduction of a baby saver law in our country. And the first of these is Section 11 of our Constitution. Now, Section 11 is the right to life. And the right to life is antecedent to all other rights in the Constitution. Without life in the sense of existence, it would not be possible to exercise rights or to be the bearer of them. The right to life also includes the right to live as a human being, to share in the existence of humanity, and to be part of a broader community. The right to life forms part of the center of our constitutional values. And then the second right would be the right to human dignity. According to Chaskelson, the right to life and human dignity are the most important of all rights, as well as the source of all other rights. They must be valued above all others. And then we look at the right in Section 28(2), which involves the best interests of a child. The best interests of a child are of paramount importance in all matters concerning a child. And we know that our act, our Children's Act, is based on the best interests of the child, where the best interest principle is highlighted and said that all decisions must be made that are in the best interests of the child. And we look at this above the best interests of adults, above the best interests of the parents. It is always the best interest of a child that must be of paramount importance. And in this respect, a baby saver would be in the best interest of a child, because it would be saving the child's life, which is guaranteeing the child's right to life, guaranteeing the child's right to human dignity, because a child to be abandoned in an unsafe location on a veld, in a toilet pit latrine, in a dustbin, is against the child's right to human dignity. It's infringing upon the child's right to human dignity, and therefore not in the best interest of a child. We also know that South Africa is a party to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And Article 6 of this convention states that state parties recognize that every child has the inherent right to life. Subsection 2 says that state parties shall ensure to the maximum extent possible the survival and development of the child. Now, placing our focus on foster care, on family reunification, those things are focused on the development of the child, but nothing is focused on the actual survival of the child, which should be a first priority, because without life, the child cannot be the bearer of all other rights. The child cannot be, there is no child if a child does not survive unsafe abandonment through safe, or rather through the institution of safe relinquishment. So therefore, the efforts need to be focused on the survival as a first priority prior to the development of the child. So what is my proposals is firstly to legalize baby savers as a first resort in South Africa. And this is based on the fact that the legalization of baby savers would mean that we don't first have to train police staff, hospital staff, as well as fire station staff on how to receive an infant that is personally handed over. That would be extensive training that would need to be conducted countrywide if we were to institute baby safe haven laws as a first resort. And that's why my proposal is for us to firstly implement baby savers as a starting point where organizations that wish to implement savers can do so. And then these organizations, obviously going through checks and balances, will be able to receive infants from mothers who are desperate and who need assistance as soon as possible. The second option, or the second proposal, is to amend the Children's Act 38 of 2005. By amending Section 305(3) of the Children's Act to specify in which instances it will mount to abandonment. So this Section 305 of the Children's Act states in which instances a child is regarded as being abandoned. And the amendment of this section would state that a child would be abandoned if a child is abandoned in an instance other than through a baby saver, and where the child is relinquished in a baby saver but shows signs of abuse. So those are the laws similar to the issue of abuse that was brought up by Namibian laws. We've included that here because should a child be safely relinquished, but a child shows signs of abuse, then that specific child will still be regarded as abandoned, which means that that particular relinquishing person, parent or guardian will be prosecutable for the act of abandonment or the crime of child abandonment. Very importantly, we are not trying to make child abandonment legal. The definition of child abandonment will stay the same, except for these few amendments. Child abandonment will still be child abandonment should children not be safely relinquished. The second amendment is amendment for consent to adoption provision, more specifically when consent will not be necessary. So we know prolonged institutionalization of children is not, there's been lots of research done in this field, and prolonged institutionalization is not in the best interests of children. So therefore, the consent to adoption provision would need to be amended to exclude the requirement of consent from parents or guardians who relinquish a child safely. And this is to allow the child to be adopted, and to be adopted without any roadblocks to that adoption. And then also the amendment of the definition of abandoned in the Children's Act to exclude children who have been safely relinquished. In conclusion, child abandonment will remain a crime. There are two key components to qualify as safe relinquishment. A baby must be safely relinquished in a baby saver, and a baby must show no signs of abuse. The objectives of this legislation is to prevent infant deaths through unsafe abandonment. So the objects of this legislation and what it comes down to at the end is to promote the child's right to life, and to promote the child's right to human dignity, and to promote the best interests of a child. And that is in essence what this law is trying to do. What I also want to add here is we have a solution. Our solution is clear. This solution has been implemented in many countries around the world. Our statistics on abandonment are of the most shocking compared to countries around the world who have implemented these laws. And so we have no excuse as a country, as a legislature, not to start by bringing a solution that will ensure that these children's lives are saved.